Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukham Karoti Vashalam Bhangum Langhayate Girim Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Thank you all for attending this morning Bhagavatam class in the auspicious month of Kartik, and it's my good fortune to be a part of this association. And I thank Nityananda Prabhu for inviting me to speak today. Thank you. So this is a beautiful verse. So Vritrasura is continuing to instruct Indra on the battlefield. So we have heard many beautiful instructions, and now one instruction here. So just a little bit of the context. Vritrasura and Indra are engaged in a battle. Just now, what has happened is Indra overcome by a weapon of Vritrasura is disheartened, and temporarily he is refusing to fight. Even Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was refusing to fight. But he was not afraid of his death. His refusing to fight was not because of being afraid of death. But here Indra, his position is unlike Arjuna. He is afraid of death. And so he is refusing to fight. One of the reasons he is refusing to fight. And Vritrasura, he is instructing him. And he is instructing him to do his duty. He is instructing him that he is not the controller. So he's encouraging him to fight. So this specific verse describing the three modes of material nature, how the soul is beyond the three modes of material nature, and it is describing the qualities of a liberated person. These three modes of material nature, this is a very important topic. Bhagavad Gita has 5 main topics. One of them is the three modes of material nature. And studies have shown that Bhagavad Gita, the three modes of material nature, there are most number of verses on this topic in Bhagavad Gita. This is a very important topic. And if you read some sections from the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, they're exactly identical. In fact, the 14th chapter verse 5 begins the same way. Sattvam rajas tama iti guna prakriti sambhavaha nibadnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. Because this verse is describing the condition of a conditioned soul. Material nature consists of 3 modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. So 14.5 discusses the position of a conditioned soul. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam verse today that we're reading, it discusses the position of a liberated soul. And in 14th chapter, Krishna is describing about modes of material nature. And then at a certain point, Arjuna is asking Krishna a question. Arjuna inquired, O my dear Lord, by which symptoms is one known who is transcendental to these 3 modes? What is his behavior? And how does he transcend the modes of nature? So if you notice some of the verses that we have already read in the Vritrasura pastime, Vritrasura is already describing the same things that Arjuna is asking, the qualities of a liberated person. And I'll read just one translation, 14th chapter, verses 22 through 25. So, here Krishna is describing to Arjuna the qualities of a transcendental personality who's beyond the three modes of material nature. Same thing that Vritrasura is describing. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O son of Pandu, he who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear, who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active. So, same thing here. Who is situated in the self and regards alike happiness and distress, who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye, who is equal towards the desirable and the undesirable, who is steady, situated equally well in praise and blame. 2 3 verses ago, Vritrasura said the same thing. Honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, and who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, verses 22 through 25. And then another question that Arjuna also asks is, how does one transcend the modes of material nature? And Krishna describes that in Bhagavad Gita 14.26, very famous verse. Mam chayo abhyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. So Prabhupada here is quoting 18.54. Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati samma sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. So that is describing, one can say, the prayojana. What happens when one is on the transcendental platform. This verse 26 is describing how does one get to the transcendental platform. Abhideya, Bhakti Yoga. Mamchayu abhyabhicharena, unalloyed, exclusive, pure devotional service unto me. Bhakti Yoga nasibade. Sagunan samatityaitan. So he transcends the modes of material nature. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate, and he is fixed on the Brahman platform. So there is a close connection between chapter 14, Bhagavad Gita, and this verse that we are reading. So I would encourage devotees to read. It's very amazing. And there are other verses also in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, right? Daivihi esha gurumai mamaya durathaya mam evaye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. That these three modes of material nature are practically, they are insurmountable. But mam evaye prapadyante, but one who takes shelter of Krishna, he can transcend the modes of material nature. And what is shelter of Krishna? So there are different ways in which one can take shelter of Krishna. The yoga ladder is karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, bhakti yoga. And Krishna mentions yoginam api sarvesham madgate antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam samyakta tamomataha. So amongst all the yogis, the best is one who is performing bhakti yoga. The mam evaye prapadyante. So prapadyante, surrender unto Krishna through the process of bhakti yoga, which is the most sublime, most easy, right? Like our acharyas sing, Parama Karuna, Pahu Dui Jana Nithai Gaura Chandra, Saba Avatara, Sara Shiromani, Kevala Ananda Kanda. So they have brought this most joyful process of bhakti yoga, so by which one can transcend the modes of material nature. So the process, it pulls one up. So one time, Srila Prabhupada, he asked one devotee, one disciple of Prabhupada, he asked Prabhupada. He really loved Bhagavad Gita, and this 14th chapter was his favorite one, the modes of material nature. And so he was having, in a way, although it was his favorite chapter, he was having a hard time, completely, grasping this whole idea that the spirit soul, although he's transcendental, Then how does he get influenced by the three modes of material nature? Then once he's engaged or entangled in the three modes of material nature, how does he get out? So it's a complicated subject matter. So he was asking Prabhupada, can you just keep it really simple and give me a simple way to understand it? And it is relevant to the example that is given here. So Prabhupada gave the example, of an ocean. An ocean has insurmountable waves. But then if in that ocean one somehow, has the shelter of a boat, right? So there is a boat. And then this gentleman or these devotees, they are on that boat. And so the ocean may be very, very rough. But then the person that is situated on the boat, at one level, he is not affected by the, the upheaval that's happening in the ocean. So he was giving the simple analogy, the ocean and the boat, and the person that is situated on the boat. Although the three modes of material nature, although the ocean is around him, he is above the ocean. He is not influenced by the ocean. So Prabhupada gave this example, three modes of material nature. So that's just sort of a backdrop. Now let's come to the purport here. As the Lord explains in Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kankshati samma sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So this one here, this is describing, as I said earlier, the qualities of a transcendental, liberated person. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. He never laments or desires to have anything. Samma sarveshu bhuteshu. He is equally disposed to every living entity. But that's not the end. So here it's clearly described, and also Prabhupada explains, there is Brahman platform, Paramatma platform, then Bhagavan platform. Right? Supreme Lord is realized in three phases: Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. So this personality, this liberated person, is on the Brahma Bhuta platform. But then the last line says, right? Says, Samma sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. So one has to go beyond just the, being situated on the Brahman platform. In a way, one can say that is just the beginning of devotional service. And then one, goes further, exclusive devotional service unto Krishna. It's clearly mentioned here. When one attains self-realization, the Brahmabhuta stage, one knows that whatever happens during his life is due to the contamination of the modes of material nature. The living being, the pure soul, has nothing to do with these modes. So now let's look at this one. When one attains self-realization, the Brahmabhuta stage, one knows that whatever happens during his life is due to the contamination of the modes of material nature. The living being, the pure soul, has nothing to do with these modes. In the midst of the hurricane of the material world, everything changes very quickly. But if one remains silent and simply observes the actions and reactions of the hurricane, he is understood to be liberated. So I was hearing His Holiness Sachinandan Maharaj. He was discussing about the divided self. So I just want to clarify that. So philosophically, it is mentioned that the soul cannot be cut into pieces, it cannot be divided. So when we're talking about the divided self, or when Maharaj is speaking about it, it's not that the soul is divided, but the way one understands is, in a way, there are two natures. There is the higher nature, the transcendental nature of the soul, and then there is the lower nature, or the conditioned nature. So this verse is talking about this. The purport, Srila Prabhupada is talking about that. The reality with the capital R is that we are all Satchidananda Vigraha. We are full of knowledge, we are eternal, full of bliss. But of course, we are infinitesimal. We are not Krishna. We are just a part and parcel of Krishna. But that's our true nature. In our conditioned state, this pure nature is covered by layers of coverings, which we acquire uh, through our sojourn in the material world. But we should clearly understand that that's not who we are. This was the topic of Gita Nagari, self-acceptance and progress. So self-acceptance means accepting that I'm not the body, I'm the spirit soul. Then also knowing the nature of the spirit soul. So that is the so my each of our nature is we are pure. We are eternally a servant of Krishna. In our conditioned state, we have some other ideas, but that's not who we really are. That's our conditioning. So the higher self, the lower self. So then, so here, this is what Prabhupada is writing. When one attains self-realization, the Brahma stage, one knows that whatever happens during his life is due to the contamination of the modes of material nature. The living being, the pure soul, has nothing to do with these modes. So when we are surrounded, when so many things are happening with us, now we have come into the process of Krishna consciousness. We have heard Samanda Gyan, and now we are practicing Krishna consciousness, Abhideya. So as we are practicing Krishna consciousness, there is one beautiful stage called Anartha Nivriti. So one has to go through the stage of Anartha Nivriti. So the chanting of the holy name is like churning, a clear lake. And when you churn the clear lake, and all the mud comes up. So this chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, it brings to our attention all the conditioning that we have. So it's very, very important that we, like Prabhupada writes at the end, last line, and remain steady in all circumstance. So when such conditioning, sometimes strong, sometimes not so strong, when the conditioning comes up, then it's good for us to hang on to the railings and be fixed. And so what are these, how do we hang on to the railings? So of course this process of devotional service is there. We hang on to the process of sadhana bhakti, but then we also hang on. We take the shelter, take the association of devotees, and who can help us in understanding what our anarthas are. Also understanding that those anarthas are not who we are actually. So having a healthy attitude towards Krishna consciousness, healthy attitude towards anartha nivriti as well. So the devotees help us identify or that these are some of the challenges we have, but these are not who we. This is not who we are. And then continuing with the process of sadhana bhakti, calling out for the mercy of the Lord, eagerness to come out of these anarthas that we have. So this is an amazing combination. All this combination, it attracts the mercy of the Lord, and we can come above these layers and layers of conditioning that we have. And so this example that is given here is hurricane. So hurricane is like a perfect word, at least for me. I mean, whatever is happening of late. Although it's fantastic to be here in Rogers Park and near the temple, but that's the amazing realization is the modes of material nature, they don't stop to act just because I've moved to Rogers Park or near the temple. So one could be right here in the temple, and the modes of material nature are acting upon us. So it does feel like a hurricane or a thunderstorm. But Srila Prabhupada is mentioning here, in the midst of the hurricane of the material world, everything changes very quickly. So the nature of this material world is temporary. Like Govinda Das's bhajan, the drop of water on the lotus leaf. What is its permanence? It's not very permanent. It's changing. So this material nature, the modes of material nature are continually acting upon us. Uh, Sometimes it seems like a big tidal wave. Sometimes it seems to be calm. So it's continuing to churn. So here Prabhupada is emphasizing the importance of observing, of getting in touch with our silent level and observing. Yeah. I was thinking about our mentor, one of our senior disciples. She would love this verse. So here Prabhupada is writing, but if one remains silent and simply observes the action and reactions of the hurricane, he is understood to be liberated. So what does liberated mean? Liberated, of course, means there is a place, a realm where one goes. But liberation also, typically, Prabhupada always explains that it is liberation from the three modes of material nature. So, pashyati apina pashyati, like Upanishad, he sees and he does not see in a way. He sees, but he does not identify. So, it's the identification that causes us bondage. And when we identify properly, then we're liberated. So this is what Srila Prabhupada is talking about. The real qualification of the liberated soul that he remains Krishna conscious, undisturbed by the actions and reactions of the material energy. So one remains silent and simply observes the action and reactions of the hurricane. So this is important, that we learn to silently observe ourselves and also to silently observe others. So just digressing a little bit, but it is connected here. There is a term called epistemology. Epistemology is how do we learn anything? How do we learn? How do we acquire knowledge? So broadly, from the Vedic conception, we hear there are two ways, right? Two ways of acquiring knowledge: ascending way of knowledge, acquiring knowledge, and descending way of acquiring knowledge, ascending and descending. And besides that, there are the pramanas. There are three pramanas, right? Pratyaksha pramana, Anumana pramana, and Shabda pramana. Pratyaksha is by sense perception, I understand something. And then Anumana is inference, I understand something. And then Shabda pramana. So and then Prabhupada also explained that there are four defects of the conditioned soul. He has imperfect senses, he commits mistakes, he is prone to illusion, and he has a cheating propensity. So coming back to epistemology, or how we learn. So one element is pratyaksha or anumana, right? Sense perception. So here, and then inferring. So there is an experience. We have an experience at the silent level. And then what Prabhupada is describing is, so we have an experience at the silent level, and then we begin to describe it, what happened. There are different levels of abstraction, one can say. There is silent level experience, then we describe, and then we go to three other realms typically. It is interpretation, judgment, and then conclusion. So typically, when we are entering into interpretation, judgment, and conclusion, we are entering into the realms of speculation, mental speculation. So, core verse, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavratam. Right? At least my realization is that we don't even have the capacity. I mean, Krishna's position is so amazingly clear that we don't, after some time, we stop speculating about Krishna. I think we accept him, that he is the supreme Lord. I mean, we accept the inconceivable, his inconceivable nature. I mean, we don't speculate about God. We give that up. But the speculation that we don't give up is about the speculation about devotees, relationships. So here Prabhupada is saying, in the middle of, in the midst of the hurricane of the material world, everything changes very quickly. But if one remains silent and simply observes the actions and reactions of the, I feel something at the silent level. And I note it. And then I begin to, so I describe it. Then I begin to interpret. Oh, this devotee did not say Haribol to me, so maybe there's he doesn't like me, or something happened, basically interpretation and judgment and conclusion. So we hover a lot on this platform. So this is a wonderful practice where we learn to stay at the silent level, not go into interpretation, judgment, and conclusion, because that's the realm of mental speculation, and then it's the sort of the what can say, the cesspool of offenses, mental offenses, then verbal offenses, and then other offenses. So here Prabhupada is talking about how this devotee, he stays, he observes. So here, like a pure devotee, liberated person, he sees the distinction. He sees that this person is in the dog's body, this living entity. This living entity is in a cow's body. This person is in a devotee's body. This is in a dog's, chandala. He sees the distinction. He observes, but he doesn't interpret, judge, or conclude. And because he doesn't interpret, judge, and conclude, he can have friendly relationships with everyone. He doesn't hate anyone. He sees, as Prabhupada is mentioning here, he sees, oh, that the modes of material nature, like Bhagavad Gita, as soon as the living entity comes into this material world, the modes of material nature get him. And so the living entity is almost, I mean, he is helpless. He is helplessly acting according to the position of the modes of material nature. And so, liberated person, he doesn't judge the person. He just doesn't judge the living entity. So, oh, this gentleman, of course, he sees that the fact that we have a body, that means we had a tendency to enjoy independently of Krishna. So we got this bad bargain. And then, what kind of a body also tells him to what extent we have misused our free will. So he sees everything through the eyes of the scriptures, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. But the beautiful thing is, he sees, he observes. He doesn't go into judgments and conclusions that this person is a gone case, is a Nityabhata. He cannot be saved. No. In fact, the mood of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, he was thinking, well, if Jagai and Madhai, they are the most fallen. If they can be delivered, then how much will the glories of my master be spread? Hmm? So, in fact, the most fallen attract the mercy of the conditioned souls. So he doesn't. So this is the liberated person. He sees the true nature of every living entity. That everybody is a devotee of Krishna. He sees that's the nature. Ekala Ishvara Krishna Arasava Pratya. Jivera Swarupohoya Krishna Rintya Das. So he's firmly fixed on that Brahman platform, seeing everybody as Brahman. There is conditioning. And then it's very simple what the liberated person does. He sees the conditioning, he sees some dormant attraction for Krishna, and he fans the spark. That's all. That's preaching. There is some dormant attraction, and he fans the spark. And then he brings him one step closer to Krishna. And then if the devotee, that person wants to go further closer to Krishna, he helps him. If he feels, well, this is how much I want to go, he says, okay, see you later after some time. Like Narada Muni, again and again he'll come, you know, and somebody saying, not yet, maybe a little later. So he is peaceful. He is engaged in Krishna consciousness. He clearly understands that he is not the controller, the liberated person. How any living entity goes back home, back to Godhead, like we've been hearing this Guru Tattva seminar, goes back home, back to Godhead, is really between Krishna and the living entity. And there are many, many living entities that can play a part in that soul going back home to Godhead. So he doesn't consider himself, the sole cause of somebody going back home, back to Godhead. So he can be detached even in his caring, even in his compassion. Hmm? So such a liberated person is always jubilant. He never laments or aspires for anything. So this is for himself and also for others. I mean, of course, a pure devotee, he is paradukha dukhi. He does aspire that everybody turn their face again to Krishna. He aspires to that, and not just aspires and he sits in his ivory tower. He does something about it also. He takes the mission, he preaches about the Lord. But then while he's preaching, he doesn't lament if somebody doesn't take up Krishna consciousness. I mean, of course, again, it's like he laments and he doesn't lament. He laments that, oh my God, how unfortunate that this conditioned soul doesn't want to act in his relationship with Krishna. But then his disposition towards him doesn't change, him or her. Come back later. I'll knock again. Come back later. Knock again. So he's Atmarama. He gives his attention to somebody else. There is so many conditioned souls to be delivered. So he turns his attention to somebody else who's eager, and in this way his devotional service goes uninterrupted, and he goes on preaching like that. Since everything is supplied by the Supreme Lord, the living entity, being fully dependent on him, should not protest or accept anything in terms of his personal sense gratification. Rather, he should receive everything as the mercy of the Lord and remain steady in all circumstances. So this is his nature. He remains steady in all circumstances. So Vritrasura is telling Indra, fight. Just don't give up in the face of obstacles. You have the weapon, the thunderbolt weapon created by Dadichi's body. It is invested with the spiritual potency of Krishna. So what do you have to lose? Nothing. So he's encouraging him to fight. And of course he's saying, I'm going to go back home, back to Godhead. So hurry up. He's instructing him like that. Okay. So similarly, I would encourage devotees to read chapter 14 Bhagavad Gita. This is a nice topic. Modes of material nature, what they are, how they affect us, how to get out of them. And this is a question that always is asked: how do we identify a liberated person? So 14th chapter Bhagavad Gita. If anybody asks you, it's there in Bhagavad Gita. Elsewhere also it's there, like second chapter Sthita Prajna, Srimad Bhagvatam. And then one other important message is how in the midst of the hurricane, learning to remain silent and observe. So this silent, of course, doesn't mean uh, you know at the level of the speech we are silent, but then there is a lot of things going on at the level of the mind. So that's a practice one has to learn. It takes time, it takes cultivation to silently to get in touch with our silent level and observe, not interpret about devotees, judge or conclude about them. So if anybody has more questions about this, maybe offline we can discuss, or even now. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Yeah. That piece that I just spoke, that can be elaborated over days, in workshops. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking about myself and this tendency about so observe and then we take it to these interpret, judge, and then conclude. So I'm thinking like, okay, if that's happening, it's the purpose behind that then is kind of a need for self-preservation. So protecting what I may believe needs to be protected about myself. So based on that, there's the interpretation, there's the judgment and conclusion. So I'm wondering what is the purpose of this silent observation?
What is
The purpose of silently observing X, Y, and Z? Like I understand the silent observation internally, but I'm trying to understand what is the purpose of the external observation.
Okay.
What is going to be my personal purpose? Why should I even observe one? Second, when we say pure.
Okay. If you can, I answer that question before you go to the next? Yeah. Well, firstly, devotional service, it is practiced amongst devotees. We're not practicing devotional service in isolation. So we are interacting with so many devotees day in, day out. Devotees, living entities, it's a part of life. For example, even when you go, for Krishna lunch, anywhere you go, we are always meeting people. Um, so when I say observe, of course, I'm not necessarily meaning. See, one can observe. One may be in the role of a like a superior and a junior, right? Like a spiritual master and a disciple, or a mentor and a mentee, counselor and counselor, like that. So there, one observes, mm, silently, and then one observes to guide the person. Okay. So in our case, whether we may not be playing those roles, but even then, to interact with peers, for example, so that is very important to observe, and especially to guard against interpretation, judgment, and conclusion, because as I said, that's typically the realm where, like the womb of offenses, one can say, the seeding place of offenses. um, yeah. So, giving an example, what it means is, so it is one thing to describe something we are seeing, right? We have an experience at the silent level, and then we describe it. Then one goes into the next thing is, interpretation. For example, the example is, that is given is, let's say I'm going to Vrindavan. I'm going to Vrindavan. Vrindavan Parikrama is coming up, and I'm in the Dham, Holy Dham, and Hemangi Masi knows this example. Uh, I'm in the Holy Dham, and then there's a bull basically charging at me. Okay, there's a bull charging at me, you know, and then I'm hoping that, anyway. So there's bull charging at me. So I have an experience at the silent level. Probably, I have chills down my spine, and so on and so forth. So there is fear, terror, whatever is happening at the silent level. Now I begin to describe it. I saw the bull coming, and and then there were devotees in front of me. I thought the devotees would protect me, but then the devotees, like they all moved out of the way, and then, like, here was I and the bull. So we were just sort of describing. So I'm going a little bit into epistemology. So there is an experience at the silent level. So abstract. Anyway, this is all discussed a little bit by Ravindra Swarup Prabhu in Gita Nagari. He talks about this abstraction, right? Abstraction, and like in the Guru Tattva. So there is a silent level experience. So when we begin to describe it, so we are abstracting or extracting, meaning our description cannot fully capture our experience at the silent level. So we're describing, the silent level experience. And then so I'm describing this. And then, so now the interpretation. So, oh, maybe, I committed some offense in the holy dham, or maybe Krishna doesn't, love me. So things are going on basically. Maybe I should not have come to Vrindavan. And then, I could come to the conclusion, all this, I will come. So the bull is charging at me. So, and then I have an experience at the silent level. I'm describing it. And then I go into this interpretation, judgment, and conclusion. So how I interpret all these, the experience has a lot to do with what happens in my life. So I bring my life's experience to the experience, and I interpret, judge, and conclude. Like that. So that's an experience. So every time we go to another higher realm, we we abstract and further abstract and further abstract. Abstract means to sort of take some essence, take a line out, basically, take something out. That. So how this is why this is important and relevant is, I mean, whether we are extending care to others or not, human to understand. I mean, human beings are the most fascinating persons, basically. Uh, so whether we may have a service of being a counselor or not, but we are interacting with devotees. So it helps us understand devotees. Just observe. Oh wow, that's kind of interesting. I mean, it's like that's interesting. I wonder, where that comes from. That's interesting. That describe, interpret that, and then you know be careful about going into interpretation, judgment, and conclusion. So that's how it can, we can guard ourselves. We can learn to see. Uh, we can rise above our likes and dislikes, our hates, and like that one. Yes, so that's what I wanted to say. Next question. Okay. Luke Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Yeah, 5 more minutes. No, go ahead.
Just on the topic, observing with detachment. On the level of karma, we react. It's just kind of like unconscious how the mind is responding. And then from that level, how the physical body will respond to any given situation. But as you're describing, when there is this detachment, then we can be of service, because we will not be simply manipulated by the material modes or karma, but we'll consciously enter the situation as an agent of Krishna's mercy to improve the situation in some way. But that requires detachment. So I was just thinking, why are we observing? Because if we do not observe, then we'll simply be manipulated by these different modes of nature. But when that observation is there, that conscious detachment, in the beginning it's an intellectual activity, but after some time it becomes natural, devotional, spontaneous. Is that identity that I am a servant of Krishna kicks in. But in the beginning it's an intellectual activity that I have to, okay, what is going on, what am I observing, but actually I'm seeing only the physical, the external, the body or the mind, but actually the soul is there. The soul has certain needs which are being expressed in this way because of these modes of nature. But how can I serve the soul? It's a very intellectual activity, but over time it becomes more natural as one's Krishna consciousness develops. I was just appreciating. But it's a very, like you said, this topic, it's like such a challenge and so uniquely personal to each individual devotee, and then from there each individual situation also. So like you said, a whole seminar would be required. It's interesting, I was just thinking this morning, because I've been reading one book and hearing on this topic of communication, which is like the fundamental thing in terms of interaction, are the way we just communicate with each other through body language and speech. And I was thinking it would be really helpful to share some of these topics with the community of devotees here and have some conversation, discussion, feedback, because this topic of communication, empathy, is super fundamental. Anyway, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Well, yeah, Nectar of Instruction, for example, a text, one of the verses, it talks about not committing the offense of looking at the pure devotee through externals, whether his body may be infirm and so on and so forth. So we have to learn. We have to learn this very important thing to properly see how things are. Yes, ma'am.
The beginning, it is an intellectual exercise till you come to the level of understanding from the soul, platform of soul. Um, Intellectual platform, there is a danger because with intellectual, if you keep it at the intellectual level, then speculations comes in. So my understanding has been, I don't know, you can correct me, is that in the beginning to act from the platform of soul, it is easier. That what we are talking about, detachment. The detachment can be exercised by following somebody who is superior, by following their direction. Then there is detachment because we have a certain propensity, we have certain conception, and we have certain tendency to do something in a particular way. And but if a higher experienced person says no, this is how it needs to be done, then it's not an intellectual adjustment. It is more, okay, I follow a higher authority. I may not have an understanding, but I follow that. Then that is detachment. Detachment doesn't mean that I don't act, but an understanding. I go with a superior understanding. So then then it's not an intellectual exercise. Because intellectual exercise, there's always this danger of speculation. And speculation is very dangerous.
Well, like Upanishad mentions, uh, this observing, also it has to be done in the association of devotees. For example, so many examples can be given, right? Srila Prabhupada, when he would go with his disciples, right, on the morning walk, right, he would go on the disciples with the morning walk. Like I was hearing a beautiful lecture by Hari Vilas Prabhu, Memories. He was, going on a morning walk, this French in France, Paris, and there was this amazing, like place, amazing house, and so everything was like perfect. You were seeing, the fence was perfect, the door, everything was like first class. So Prabhupada was just describing, that's first class. Yeah, that is first class. So he was just observing, and he was describing. So he's teaching his disciples. He's teaching, and then he says, "What? This is too good. This is too good." Meaning that person that's living in the house, he can't get out. It's too good. It's too first class. So anyway, so he's teaching. Then so many things like Prabhupada again on a morning walk. Somebody, she comes and gives him a flower. Like an old lady, she comes and gives him a flower. Or as she's approaching, some devotees are trying to guard, that lady. But this old lady, she comes in and gives him a flower. And then Prabhupada says, her devotional service has begun. Just in that act of giving the flower. So he's teaching his disciples. What are you seeing? You're seeing, I'm seeing, oh, that somebody just gave a flower to Prabhupada. He is seeing that this is the beginning of her devotional service. So it's not interpretation or judgment or conclusion. So it's again based on Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So I was sharing this pratyaksha and anumana. It has to be subservient to Shabda Pramana. We can't check on inference and especially because we are conditioned. we have the tendency to commit offenses, mistakes, sorry. So then it has to be there. Yeah. And what Mataji is saying, I think intellectually, it can be, if you're, especially if you're doing this, if you're learning to observe, and all do all these things by oneself, then it can be a tricky area. So one has to learn, and then of course one has to practice it oneself. Then one practices, and then one checks. For example, the doctor, the Ayurveda doctors, so they always have apprentices. Like recently, I went to a doctor, so I told them about my eyes and so on and so forth, and he looked at my nails. They said, "Oh," and so he said something else is the issue. So he's teaching his assistant how to observe. So that is no substitute for that personal guidance. Everything is there in a way in the scriptures, but then how to actually practice all these things, it requires close guidance. Yeah, so that's important. Okay, so I think we'll end here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.